The mining outpost was always loud, full of the sound of heavy machines shouting workers, and the deep hum of generators. But that morning felt different. Something in the air made his skin prickle as he walked across the loading bay. The kind of feeling you get before something important happens. He had been moving crates since dawn, sweat running down his back, when he noticed her standing near the far wall. At first, he thought she was just another passenger waiting for transport. But then he realized she wasn't moving, not even shifting her weight like people usually do. She was just standing there, still and calm, watching. She was small, barely 4 feet tall, but she didn't look like a child. Her silver-gray skin caught the light. Smooth and almost shining. Her hair was black and cut short, framing a face that was sharp yet strangely delicate. Her eyes were large and bright, a strange shade between green and gold. And when they locked onto his, he froze in place. For a moment, the whole noise of the bay seemed to fade. It was like her gaze reached inside him, pulling out thoughts and memories he didn't even know were close to the surface. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just looked at him like she already knew everything about him. Some of the other workers noticed her too. He saw the way they glanced and then quickly looked away, whispering to each other. One man muttered under his breath, "Stay clear of that one. Trouble follows her." But they didn't go near, and that made him even more curious. Before he could decide whether to approach her or keep working, she started walking toward him. Her steps were slow, but certain, like she owned the ground she was walking on. When she stopped right in front of him, he felt strangely nervous, which made no sense. She was small, unarmed and alone, yet his chest felt tight. "You'll work for me now," she said. Her voice was calm, but carried something under the calm. "I'll revive something under the surface," a weight that pressed on him. He blinked, half certain he had misheard. "What?" he asked. "You'll work for me now," she repeated, and then she spoke his full name. Exactly right, and told him things about his life that no one else here could possibly know. His home city, the accident when he was a child, the scar on his right shoulder from falling off a cargo ramp years ago. "How do you know that?" he asked, his voice quieter than he expected. She tilted her head slightly. "I know because I chose you," she said, and though her words were simple, something about them felt final. Like there was no point in arguing. He should have laughed. He should have told her she was crazy, but instead he found himself standing still, listening, and when she told him to follow, his feet moved before his mind decided to as they walked across the bay. He noticed the way people stepped aside without her asking. Even the station guards, known for pushing workers around, moved away and didn't make eye contact. It was like she had an invisible shield of authority around her. He tried to speak again, to ask where they were going, but the words caught in his throat. She didn't look back, didn't explain. Yet he felt sure she knew every thought in his head. She led him through a narrow side corridor, past storage rooms and into a quieter section of the station. The air was cooler here, the walls darker, as if they had stepped into another world. Entirely, she stopped at a locked door, placed her hand against the panel, and without any code or key, it opened with a soft click. Inside was a small room with no windows, only a single chair and a table with a strange black device on it. She gestured for him to sit, and for some reason, he obeyed. "You belong to me now," she said, not in a threatening way, but as if she was stating a fact of nature, like telling someone the sky was blue. He wanted to protest, to say he belonged to no one, but deep down, he already knew something had shifted. It wasn't fear exactly, it was something heavier, something that pulled him toward her even as his mind screamed to be careful. She didn't speak again for a while, just watched him with those strange eyes. And he realized that the moment he saw her in the loading bay, his life had started to change. He just didn't know how far it would go, or what it would cost. At first, he told himself it was just intimidation. Maybe she had some trick. Maybe she knew how to read people well enough to scare them into doing what she wanted. But the more time he spent near her, the more he realized it was something far stranger. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't threaten anyone, yet people obeyed her without question. When she walked through the station's market, the loud bargaining and arguments seemed to soften around her. Sellers gave her better prices without being asked. Buyers stepped aside to let her pass, and no one dared to make eye contact for too long. The strangest part was the guards. These men were famous for their roughness, for shoving miners and shouting at traders, yet when she approached, they straightened up, lowered their weapons, and sometimes even nodded respectfully. He had never seen them act like that toward anyone, not even the station commander. One afternoon, he decided to test it as they walked down a long metal corridor toward the docking area. A guard blocked their way. "This section is restricted," the guard said, but his voice was uncertain, like he wasn't sure he should be saying it. The girl stepped forward, her small frame almost touching the tall guard's chest. She didn't say a word. She just looked at him, and slowly, the guard stepped aside without another sound. Once they were past, he whispered, "What did you just do?" "Nothing," she replied, and kept walking, but he could feel it. There was something in her presence, something invisible that made people want to please her or fear her, or maybe both at the same time. He started noticing it more with himself, too. She would say small things. "Sit there, carry this. Don't speak to him," and without thinking, he would do exactly as she said. At first it bothered him, made him feel like he was losing control of his own choices. But she never ordered him to do something that harmed him. In fact, most of her instructions seemed to keep him away from trouble. One evening, when they were walking back to the workers' quarters, a fight broke out ahead. Two men were shouting and pushing each other. One of them pulled a sharp piece of metal from his belt before he could even think about getting involved. She touched his arm lightly and said, "Not this way." Without hesitation, he turned and followed her down another path. Later that night, he heard that one of the men had been stabbed and taken to the medical ward. He wondered if she had known it would happen, or if she just had a way of sensing danger. It wasn't only about avoiding trouble, though. She seemed to know how to make things happen in their favor. When food rations were running low, she somehow got them extra portions. When his work shift was suddenly extended, she made it vanish from the schedule the next day. And when the foreman tried to assign him to the most dangerous section of the mines, the order was quietly removed before morning. He began to understand why people called her dangerous. It wasn't that she would attack you, it was that she could change the course of things without anyone realizing how. But the strangest moment came one night in the mess hall. They were sitting in the corner, eating quietly, when a tall trader walked in. The kind of man who liked to show his power. He spotted her, walked straight over, and slammed his hand on the table. "You owe me," he said, his voice loud enough for half the room to hear. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She simply looked up at him. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the man's face paled. He stepped back, muttered something under his breath, and left without another word. He leaned closer to her, speaking low. "What did you do to him?" "I reminded him," she said, and went back to eating as if nothing had happened. He wanted to ask more, but something told him not to. Part of him feared the answer. Part of him feared she might turn that same invisible force on him if he pushed too far. Still, he couldn't deny that his life was changing. Every day she seemed to pull him deeper into her world, a place where rules bent around her, where people who thought they were in control ended up doing exactly what she wanted. Sometimes, when he lay awake at night, he wondered if he had been given a choice at all, or if the moment she first looked at him in the loading bay, his fate had already been decided. And no matter what he thought, he was already hers. It was late in the night cycle when he felt a light tap on his shoulder. He woke instantly, finding her standing beside his bunk. Her face calm, but her eyes sharper than usual. She didn't speak for a moment, just looked at him until he sat up. "Get dressed," she said, her voice soft but carrying a weight that left no room for delay. He pulled on his boots, still half asleep, and followed her out into the dimly lit corridors. The station was quieter now, the loud voices of workers, replaced by the low hum of machinery and the distant hiss of air vents. "Where are we going?" He whispered, but she didn't answer. She simply walked, her short steps somehow keeping a steady, fast pace that made him focus on not falling behind. They passed the mess hall, the storage rooms, and headed toward the lower levels. He noticed how few people were down here and how the lights seemed dimmer. The air cooler, finally. They stopped in front of a heavy metal door with a glowing red panel. It was the kind of door only senior officers were allowed to open. He frowned. "We can't go in there," he said. "You can," she replied, stepping aside. Her eyes locked on his. "Open it." He stared at her, confused. "I don't have clearance." "You will," she said, her tone certain. "Just place your hand on the panel and think about opening it." It sounded ridiculous, but he did as she said, and to his shock, the panel turned green, the locks clicked, and the door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the air felt different, heavier. The walls were lined with strange markings, and in the center stood a pedestal holding a small, black, cube-shaped object. Faint blue light pulsed from its surface like a heartbeat. "What is it?" he asked, his voice hushed without meaning to be. She stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the cube. "This is why I am here," she said, "and this is why you belong to me." He didn't like the sound of that, but he couldn't take his eyes off the cube. Something about it pulled at him, like it was alive. She reached out, but instead of touching it, she nodded toward him. "Pick it up." "Why me?" he asked. "Because it will only let you," she said, as if that explained everything. Slowly, he stepped forward, his hands trembling when his fingers brushed the surface. A strange warmth spread up his arm. Not painful, but powerful. It was like holding the heart of a storm. The cube's glow brightened for a moment, then settled. She nodded in satisfaction. "Good. Now we take it." As they turned to leave, a deep voice echoed from the hallway outside. "Stop right there." Two guards stood in the doorway. "There?" "Weapons raised, that's restricted property." One of them said. He froze, unsure what to do. But she stepped in front of him, her small frame blocking their view of the cube. "You didn't see us," she said, her voice steady. The guards hesitated, their eyes unfocused for a moment, then slowly lowered their weapons. Stepping aside without another word, he followed her out, still gripping the cube, his mind racing. "How did you do that?" he asked when they were alone. "Later," she said. "For now, keep it hidden. No one else can touch it." Back in his quarters, she made him place the cube inside a sealed metal case she had brought. She locked it, then sat down across from him. "You need to understand," she began. "That object is older than this station. Older than your species' time among the stars. It can power things far beyond what humans or most aliens can build." "Then why me?" he asked again, her eyes softened slightly. "Because you can hold it without breaking. And because you are not corrupted yet." He didn't know what that meant, but something in her voice told him it wasn't a compliment or an insult. Just a fact. For the rest of the night, he couldn't sleep, the memory of the cube's warmth still lingering in his hands, and the realization sinking in that whatever she had pulled him into, it was far bigger than anything he had imagined. The next morning started like any other. The steady hum of the mining outpost, the smell of recycled air, the faint metallic taste of water from the tap. But the peace didn't last long. By mid-morning, the station's docking alarms echoed through the halls, a sound that meant new ships had arrived. He didn't think much of it until he saw them. Three tall figures in dark armor stepping through the airlock. Their helmets shaped like sharp blades, their movements sharp and precise. These were not traders or miners. They were mercenaries. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had seen their type before. Hired guns who never asked questions, only followed orders, and the kind of people you didn't want looking for you. They walked straight past the guards, as if they already owned the place. One of them scanned the crowd, the visor on his helmet flashing red, then stopping briefly on him before moving on when he found her in the market later. She was already watching them from a distance, her expression unreadable. "They're here for me," she said. Simply, as if stating the weather, he felt his chest tighten. "What do they want?" "What I carry," she replied, her gaze still fixed on the mercenaries. "And what you now protect?" He didn't have to ask what she meant. The cube. That afternoon, one of the mercenaries approached him near the storage bay. His voice, smooth but cold. "We can make you rich," he said. "Just tell us where the little silver one is hiding." His first instinct was to answer, to get rid of the danger. But the words never left his mouth. It was as if an invisible barrier held them back. Her presence in his mind stronger than his own fear. "I don't know what you're talking about," he finally said, forcing the words out. The mercenary stared at him for a moment, then gave a thin smile. "You will," and walked away. That night, she came to his quarters without knocking. "They've already asked you, haven't they?" she said. He nodded. "What happens if they find us?" Her eyes locked on his. "They won't if you do exactly what I say." The next day, the mercenaries searched the lower levels, questioning workers, opening storage units, even walking through the sleeping quarters, each time they passed. He felt their eyes linger on him a little too long. By the third day, the tension was thick enough to taste. Fewer people spoke in the halls, and the workers avoided the mercenaries entirely. One evening, as he returned from his shift, he found two of them waiting outside his room. One stepped forward. "We're done asking nicely," he said, his tone sharp. Before he could respond, a voice came from behind him. Her voice. "Step away." The mercenaries turned, and for a moment, there was silence. Then something shifted in the air. He couldn't see what it was, but the mercenaries took a slow step back, their hands tightening on their weapons, yet they didn't raise them. "This isn't over," one of them muttered before they walked away. She stepped closer, her expression calm, but her eyes burning with quiet fire. "They'll try again," she said, "but not tonight." That night, as he lay in his bunk, the cube's image burned in his mind, glowing faintly inside the sealed case. He knew now. It wasn't just an object. It was a reason for people to kill, and somehow it had tied him to her in a way he couldn't escape. The threat was no longer far away. It was here, walking the same halls, breathing the same air, and it was only a matter of time before the next move came. From that night on, her orders became sharper, more direct. There was no casual talk, no room for hesitation. When she told him to wake, he woke. When she told him to eat, he ate. When she told him to avoid certain people, he turned and walked away without a word. At first, he thought it was just paranoia. Maybe she wanted to keep him safe from the mercenaries. But soon he realized it was more than that. She was drawing invisible boundaries around his life, deciding who he could speak to, where he could go, even how long he could rest. She began to appear suddenly, in corridors, in the mess hall, even at the edge of the mining pits, always watching, always making sure he stayed where she wanted him to be. It was as if she knew his movements before he made them. One morning, when he started toward the repair docks, she stepped into his path. "Not that way," she said, her voice quiet, but firm. "I just need to check," he began, but she cut him off with a single look. He turned and followed the route she chose without another word. Later that day, he overheard two workers whispering about an accident at the repair docks. A collapsed scaffold that had injured 3 men. He felt a cold weight in his stomach. The more it happened, the harder it became to see her control as just control. Sometimes it felt like protection. Like she was steering him away from traps he didn't even know were there. Still, it was strange to feel his own will slipping away. He had always been stubborn, independent, someone who decided for himself. Now, he was moving through each day. Like a shadow of her decisions, one evening, he tried to test her. In the market, he saw a vendor selling a tool he had been wanting for months. She had told him earlier to head straight back to his quarters. But he stopped at the stall anyway, his fingers reaching for the item. Before he could touch it, she appeared. Beside him, no sound of footsteps, no sign of where she had come from. "Not this," she said softly, and her hand closed gently around his wrist. He met her gaze, wanting to pull away, but found himself stepping back from the stall, without protest, without even understanding why. It wasn't only about keeping him safe, it was about making sure he followed her. Always, that night, as they sat in his quarters, she spoke while watching the cube's sealed case. "There are lines you do not cross," she said. "You may not see them, but I do, and if you follow me, you will survive." "What if I don't want to follow?" he asked quietly. She turned to him, her eyes calm but unyielding. "You already do," and it was true, even in his mind. He couldn't imagine walking away from her now. Days passed, and her influence deepened. She began giving him tasks without explaining their purpose, moving small packages from one part of the station to another, meeting strangers in quiet corridors and passing them sealed envelopes. Sometimes he carried messages he wasn't allowed to read. When he asked questions, she only said, "Everything has its time." One night, he woke to find her sitting at the table in his quarters, watching him. "You dream loudly," she said, as if she had been there for hours. She told him of things he had seen in his sleep, memories from years ago, thoughts he had never spoken aloud, and though it unsettled him, part of him felt exposed in a way that wasn't entirely unwelcome. It was no longer just his actions she shaped. It was his mind, his choices, his thoughts. By now, he realized she didn't just lead him, she owned the path beneath his feet. And yet, as strange as it was, a part of him began to trust it, too. Lean on the certainty that she always seemed to know where to step next, even if it meant he no longer decided for himself. The first signs came quietly, a low vibration through the floor plates, a faint hum that didn't belong to the mining machinery. At first, he thought it was just another cargo ship docking, but then the alarms began to scream, a deep, rising tone that sent a shiver through everyone on the station. Red lights flashed along the walls. The automated voice repeated, "Security. Breach all personnel to safe zones," but he barely heard it over the sudden rush of footsteps as workers and traders bolted toward the shelters. She appeared in front of him, as if she had been waiting for this moment, her eyes sharper than ever. "We move now," she said, no hesitation in her voice. "What's happening?" he asked, already feeling his heart hammer. "They've come," she replied. And he didn't need to ask who before he could say anything else. She pressed a small metal pack into his hands. "The cube, it's inside," she said. "Do not let go of it." The corridor shook violently. A deep boom echoing through the metal structure, dust falling from the ceiling panels somewhere above them. Something heavy had exploded. He followed her as she led him down the narrow maintenance tunnels, the air thick with the smell of burning circuits. They passed to guards lying unconscious, their weapons scattered every few seconds. The floor trembled again, each time harder than before. He could hear distant shouting, bursts of gunfire, and the high-pitched whine of energy weapons. She moved quickly, weaving through the maze of passageways as if she had memorized every twist and turn. He tried to keep up, the cube's weight in his hands feeling heavier with every step. At one junction, they nearly collided with a group of mercenaries. Their armor dark and sharp-edged. They raised their weapons, but before they could fire, she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Leave," for a split second. The mercenaries froze, their fingers twitching on the triggers. Then, as if compelled by something unseen, they lowered their guns and turned away, vanishing into another corridor without a word. He didn't even have time to be amazed. She grabbed his arm and pulled him onward. The deeper they went, the more the sounds of battle faded, replaced by the steady hiss of air vents and the distant hum of engines. Finally, they reached a wide door marked with faded yellow paint. She placed her hand on the control panel. The door opened slowly, revealing a dimly lit hangar inside. A small but sleek ship rested on landing struts, its surface black and smooth, like polished stone, its design unlike any human or alien vessel he had seen before. "This is ours," she said, moving toward the ship. He followed, glancing back at the corridor. "What about the others?" he asked. She stopped, turned to him, and shook her head. "If we stay, neither of us will live." A loud crash echoed from somewhere above. The hangar lights flickered, dust rained from the ceiling. She ran up the boarding ramp, gesturing for him to follow inside. The ship was small, but filled with controls he didn't understand. The walls hummed softly. She moved quickly, pressing buttons and flipping switches. The ramp closed behind them with a hiss. The ship shuddered, the hum deepened, then the floor seemed to drop away as they lifted off. Through the forward screen, he saw the hangar doors open, revealing the blackness of space and the glow of distant stars. The station was falling away beneath them, flashes of light marking where weapons. Fire still raged. A massive ship loomed nearby, its hull bristling with cannons. He guessed it belonged to the mercenaries. "They'll follow us," he said, gripping the cube tightly. "They'll try," she replied, her hands steady on the controls. A burst of energy fire lit up the darkness behind them. The ship jerked as something grazed its shields. She didn't flinch, twisting the craft into a sharp dive. The stars spinning across the screen, another shot missed them by meters. She flipped a switch, and the ship surged forward with a sudden burst of speed that pressed him back into his seat. The enemy vessel shrank behind them, their weapons fire fading into the distance. When the danger was finally out of sight, he let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Somewhere they can't reach us," she said, her gaze fixed ahead. "But this is only the beginning." He looked down at the cube in his hands, its faint blue light pulsing gently, and realized that whatever storm they had just escaped, a bigger one was still coming. For a long time, the only sound inside the small black ship was the steady hum of its engines. He sat in the seat opposite her, the cube still in his hands, its faint blue glow lighting his fingers. Outside the window, stars slid past in endless silence. She didn't speak, her eyes locked on the controls, her hands steady. It was as if she was waiting for something. Finally, he broke the silence. "You have to tell me now. Why me? Why all of this?" She glanced at him, her golden green eyes catching the dim light. "Because I needed someone who could hold it," she said, nodding toward the cube. "And because you are not like the others." He frowned. "Not like the others? How?" "You don't crave power," she replied. "Most would see the cube and think only of what it could give them. You hold it and think of the danger." He looked down at the glowing object, feeling its strange warmth against his palms. "So, what is it really?" She leaned back in her seat, her voice quieter now. "It is called the core. It is older than your species, older than most worlds you've heard of. It can power ships that cross galaxies in minutes. It can build cities in hours, or destroy them in seconds." His grip on the cube tightened, and the mercenaries wanted it for that. "They work for someone far worse," she said. "A hand that moves armies without showing its face. A hand that will keep moving until it holds everything." He felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "And you?" You stole it from them. I recovered it, she said firmly. It was never theirs to take. It was hidden for a reason, and if they had it, whole systems would burn. He studied her for a long moment, trying to read her face. You've been controlling me since the moment we met. You made me follow you, made me obey without thinking. Why? Her eyes softened slightly, because without that, you would be dead already. I did not take away your will to hurt you. I shaped it to keep you alive. He let out a slow breath. Part of him wanted to be angry, to demand his freedom back. But another part of him knew she was right. Every time she had stopped him, it had saved him. Why not just do this alone? He asked. She shook her head. The core accepts only one bearer at a time. Once it chooses, no other can touch it without paying the price. The moment you picked it up in that chamber, it became yours. And now? So did I. The words hung in the air, heavier than the hum of the ship. So what happens now? He asked quietly. She looked out at the endless stars. Now we run, but not forever. There will come a time when we turn back. When we face them, and when that day comes, you will be ready. He wanted to laugh at the idea. He was no soldier, no hero. Just a man who worked in the mines. But then he remembered how he had walked through guarded halls with the core. In his hands, how he had faced mercenaries without giving in. And how he had followed her into the storm and survived. For the first time, he wondered if she saw something in him he couldn't see yet. She reached over, her small hand resting lightly on the cube, her voice low. Do you feel it? He nodded slowly. It's alive. It is, she said. It will speak to you in time. It will show you things. But it will also test you, and if you fail, it will leave you empty. He met her gaze. Then I won't fail. A faint smile touched her lips. That is why I chose you. The ship drifted on, far from the mining outpost, far from the mercenaries. But he knew the peace wouldn't last. The core pulsed in his hands like a slow heartbeat. And with each glow, he felt a strange truth sinking in. He was no longer just a miner, no longer just a man living day to day. He was something else now. Something bound to her, bound to the core, and bound to whatever future it would bring. For better or worse, his life was no longer his own, and deep down, he knew he didn't want it to be.